What's up everybody? Boy Busy here, and today we're going to be talking about water because today is actually my watering day for all of my plants. Now, when you start gardening, you're going to wonder when you need to water your plants, and that's obviously up to the plants in reality. However, it's not, because you need to have these plants work on your schedule most of the time, and to have them be lush and beautiful like all of these, you have to figure out what's best for you. Now, you'll read on the internet that you shouldn't have a typical watering day. However, I have a watering day. Lots of other places do too, like nurseries where you buy most of these plants. They water when they water. They don't wait till the plants need water. So on my watering day, what I typically do is go around and I see what needs to be watered, where everything needs to be trimmed, see what I need to move around. But in general, I just need to see what needs to be watered and what needs to be taken care of. Now, as you can see behind me, I have an array of plants, all just sitting here. These are all my container plants right now that some will be going in the ground soon, some of them won't be. They'll be getting in other pots. But you might be wondering why they're all sitting here, why they're sitting behind me. But we'll get to that in a second. There's a couple of different types of watering techniques that you really need to worry about in your garden. Really, if you have container plants, there's two types, and if you have in-ground plants, there's one type of watering in reality. But let's talk about container plants first. As you can see, all these are in trays, just like this. This is what's called the 10-20 tray in the landscaping and nursery industry. I think it's just because of the dimensions. I didn't look up why it's called the 10-20 tray, to be honest. This one comes from a place called greenhousemegastore.com. Not a sponsor, but it's made in the USA. It's one reason I got it. I got I think 10 or 15 of these trays for about 15 bucks. They're super cheap. These are their economy version, really. But what I use these for is a number of different things: plant transportation, organization, as you can see. But primarily I use these for watering. Now, what nurseries like to do with these is actually just use them as planting trays, because that's originally what they're for, these solid ones. You can actually get some that have drain holes or a mesh bottom in here, and these are all used for different types of things like drying your plants, or when you might just use these for watering and you overwater them, that way all the excess goes out. But I primarily use these for what's called bottom watering of my plants. And I do that with a lot of my succulents because it's easier for them to be watered in a bottom water way versus a top water way, which can actually cause something called root rot. Now, the reason I said there are two types of planting or watering for your container plants is because there is. Obviously, when plants are in the ground, they get water from below and above when it rains. Naturally, plants are going to want to pull water from the bottom. So this is why primarily I will bottom water all of my succulents, because that's how they really work. But how does that actually work once you put the plants in the water? So I'll fill this tray up, which I'll do in a little bit. Let me find a plant real quick. And so I'll just take the tray, fill it up with water, and then I fill it almost all the way. And since this is a terracotta pot, it will actually start absorbing all the water through the pot and through this small hole that I've put in the bottom of this pot. I have no idea if that's in shot, but that way the water comes up this way through the soil just like it would in the ground. Now, why is that important? Because all the roots are down here. That's it. That's the most important reason why this is so effective, is roots are down here. They're not up here. They're not over here, usually. So that's where the plants grew to get watered down. That's why bottom watering is so effective. But the most effective reason for using bottom watering in plants like succulents, but where did I get this one from? And other plants, oh, hold on, like this one, which is a senecio. This is actually a plant that is kind of difficult to top water because it's such a fragile plant. That's another reason you can use bottom watering. It's very beneficial for watering when you need to actually water plants that are a bit fragile. But what do I mean by that? Let's see. I've been nursing this plant back to health for 2 years, but I can just pull off a piece just like that. That was that easy. So this plant, when I water it from the top very heavily, or if it gets rained on very heavily, a lot of these small branches of the plant break off because it's very fragile. So what I do, since this bowl has a hole in the bottom of it, I just put it in one of these trays and let all of the soil and the roots soak up water naturally. These are kind of hard to put in sometimes, like I said, fragile plant. Now earlier I mentioned root rot and why bottom watering is really an effective way to avoid that. It's really easy. Let me take this other specimen plant that I have, pop it out, because this is something that's got old compacted soil on it. So what I can do with this plant, this soil is very tight and compact. So what happens is when we put it in the water, water comes up through all the roots, which you can't really see too easily to see. So it's got all these little roots right here where all the water soaks right up, and it does it naturally. The soil and the plant and the roots itself have, let's just say, a maximum capacity. I don't know the technical term for it, but they have a maximum capacity of the water they will absorb through capillary action, which means once they're full of their water, they're not going to on-take any more, and therefore they're not going to have root rot. Now, another benefit to bottom watering is certain plants will make better use of the water when they get it from the bottom, which means you have to water them less. I have this giant Hortheopsis that I've been growing for 2 years now, and a few months ago I'd been top watering it. I wasn't paying attention, and I actually induced root rot in the plant. However, it wasn't at the bottom of the plant, it was in the middle, so the plant started falling over. This is the original mother part of the plant. And this bad boy was the crown. When I took this off, it was just this single plant surrounded by all these tiny rosettes that were about that big. But what happened was I'd overwatered it, which is really hard to do with something like this. It's an aloe plant, so it's very thick leaves. They soak up a lot of water. It's very, very hardy. But what I learned was I was overwatering it, and I wasn't giving it enough time to dry out. That's why bottom watering is important for this plant, because once it soaks everything up, I don't have to water it again for weeks, usually in the winter and the fall, which we don't really have here in Florida. But in the summer, instead of watering it once a week, I can usually get away with usually once every 2 weeks, depending on how hot it's been and where this specific plant has been in my yard or my garden. We just had a butterfly flying. I think it was a zebra tail. Oh, never mind, that was a finch. Never mind, it was a finch that came to check out my geraniums. But these are very, very beneficial with bottom watering. I cannot kill them anymore. But let's talk about top watering, because sometimes you have to do it. Such as hanging plants, even though you see that these are clearly in my 10-20 tray. The reason is, with some of my hanging plants, I do hybrid style of watering. I'll top water and bottom water depending on what type of plant they are and what time of the year it is. Typically, for these two hanging plants, which is a typical golden pothos, and this is a Hoya, I typically will bottom water these earlier in the part of the year, like now. But once it starts getting hotter during the summer, I top water them a lot more because they're usually exposed more to the sun, particularly this Hoya, because Easter's coming up, and this is actually an Easter flower. So this is little thing right here, which you might not be able to see, is a peduncle, where I'm actually going to have all of the flowers for this come out. It looks like it's got some bugs on it, but it might be sand. But since this is about the flower, that means it needs more water and more nutrients, so I have to water it more. This pothos, I know it looks bad, but it's been brutalized, it's been beat up, but it's still healthy. Got all these little roots coming out right here and here. But I like to bottom water it to ensure its longevity, because pothos plants are very easy to grow, but they're also very, very tolerant of different watering schedules. But I like to keep these on about a weekly watering schedule no matter what. But like I said, I will top water these because I'll have them hanging up, and I don't always want to pull all my plants down. This isn't even all my plants. I don't want to pull all my plants down, bring them over here under my gazebo or to my watering table, which I have on the other part of the garden. To do this once a week or once every 7 to 10 days, it can be tedious. So if I just want to do a quick water, I'll leave these hanging up and I'll just water them from the top, and they're perfectly fine. But it's not always the perfect solution for every plant. Just because some plants are finicky, like the small Senecio I showed you, it's very difficult to top water without killing it. So that's one reason I prefer for a lot of my container plants and my succulents especially. Over here, I prefer to bottom water them because even though they are slow growing plants, it's very easy to induce root rot in them because they're so slow growing, and it's very, very easy to overwater them. Now, another reason that's very good to bottom water is, let me see if I can find the correct plant for this. That's not the right one. Is to help deal with soil compaction. Now, just like the other plant that I showed you, this one, they came from the same nursery at the same time. They've been in these pots been in these tiny little 4-inch pots for almost 2 years. But this soil is very, very hard and very compact. It's not falling off, it's not shaking off. This is just loose stuff. But it's very tight and very compact, and a huge benefit to bottom watering, especially when you're getting ready to transplant, is this entire, I guess, ball of soil becomes soaked and it absorbs all that water, which means you can break this apart a lot more easily. But that's also beneficial for plants that you're still trying to figure out what you're going to do with. You can keep them in a smaller container for longer, because I still haven't found a place to put this, even though I've had it for like 18 months. So I continue to bottom water this, so I water it less frequently, and I ensure that all of this soil gets water and nutrients, because like I said, this is very compact soil. So if I water this from the top, all of it flows out the bottom. It doesn't actually get absorbed because this is very, very tough, very compact soil, and it's become what's called hydrophobic, which means it repels water, just like other things we use in the garden. That's not what I want to do with these plants. Obviously, I need to feed this plant with water and nutrients. So that is a huge benefit to bottom watering, is when you have plants that have been in pots for a little too long, it really loosens that soil up a lot easier, especially about the transplant, or like I said, you're still trying to find a place for them in the garden. Now, I do have a ton of other plants that currently I top water because they're in containers sitting around the garden waiting to be planted. However, once those goes in the ground, they will then benefit from hybrid watering style, which is nothing more than letting plants do what they do normally. Get out of my armpit. And absorb water from the bottom from the natural aquifers and water that's soaked into the soil here in Florida, as well as when I come by and I top water with either irrigation or my watering wand by myself. So that way I can ensure that no matter what, things in the ground get enough water, but that's not usually a problem if you have good enough drainage for your soil. They can get roots really far down and they can reach wherever the water is. So you may be wondering why I keep talking about bottom watering and fertilizing. Well, it's actually really, really good to do it this way because it's really, like I said, it's hard to overwater a plant, which also means if you're using the right nutrients, it will be hard, if not impossible, to over-nutrient your plants. And typically what I do with this is, since it's getting hotter, I will start fertilizing my plants, if not every other watering when I do this. Especially for these succulents, they don't get a lot of nutrients out of this soil because I purposely don't put any in there just yet. So I supplement a lot of things with stuff like this. This is Neptune's Harvest Organic Fish and Seaweed Fertilizer. And in case you're wondering, yes, it is organic. It's OMRI listed. Now, you might be asking what's in here. Well, it's on the label, fish and seaweed. That's it. Nothing else. Water, obviously, but nothing else in here. It's actually just crushed up fish, fish bones, fish guts, everything that's in a fish, and a lot of crushed up, goopy seaweed that's been fermented out. And I like to use this because it's very low, has very low NPK levels, and since it's organic, it's almost impossible to over fertilize. Whereas when you get a synthetic or chemical fertilizer, it's very easy to over fertilize with those, because those chemicals and the ingredients in those are chemically derived, and they're not natural, so they burn through plants much more quickly. This is fish and seaweed. It smells horrible, but it works. And this is what I've been using. This exact bottle I've been using for about 8 months. It's almost gone. It smells terrible. But this is primarily what I use for all of my plants. Before this, I actually used Neptune's Harvest, just seaweed fertilizer. That was it. I was just testing different methods or different types of fertilizer to see what would be best. And so far, this fish and seaweed seems to be the best for my container plants. I will be buying some more stuff throughout the year, particularly some stuff from Australia to help use, because of our climate here in Florida. It's very similar to that in Australia, so I take a lot of my tips from Australian gardeners and landscaping companies. So now I've talked about all these container plants and what I do with them as far as fertilizer goes. You guys have already seen the other plants around the garden, so how do I actually water those? How do I fertilize those? That's really easy. Watering, super simple. I just go out and get my watering wand. I better not do it that way. And I just get that water going. But I have two methods of fertilizing my in-ground plants. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the other part of what I need. But typically what I'll do is I'll get a hand sprayer like this. This was $8 at Lowe's, nothing expensive. And I'll just take this. This is only a half-gallon sprayer. They have larger ones, but I don't need those right now. They have battery-powered ones. I don't need that. So I'll take this. And like I said, I don't really have to measure this. But I know with Neptune's Harvest, I know that one capful of this is good for 2 of these, which makes 1 gallon. So typically I just use half a capful of this, throw it in there, start filling up water, swish it around, put it back together, and I will take it around my plants. Shoot, I don't have the other one that's already prepared. Just pump it up, because you have to build up pressure for this. Pump it, and I'll just go and manually spray all of my plants. And this works great for foliar fertilization, but as you've seen in other videos, I also use this for things like my neem spray or my fungicide spray, and I wash them out. But this is a really easy method to do this when you don't have a ton of plants. If you have a ton of plants, you're going to need something probably bigger than this. Otherwise, you'd be mixing up a ton of batches. But since I use this as a foliar spray, or sprayer, and I use it in combination with this, it has instructions right here. See, I've got house plants, outdoor plants, I think compost inducer, I don't really remember, all the directions are scratched off, and seed germination. So it has different directions on how to use this for different types of plants and different types of watering and what you're going to do. So when I use this for my outdoor plants, it says use an 1/8 cup per gallon. That's a ton. I don't do that. But all you have to do is mix a little bit of this and you just spray the plants. That's it. It's pretty easy. So, but you don't want to actually do that when it's too sunny or too hot, like it is right now. It's getting up there and I shouldn't be watering too much, because when you put stuff like this on your plants, or when you use something like Foliage Pro from Dynagrow or other things like that, if you do it too late in the morning, you will end up burning your plants. So typically you need to do this stuff early in the morning, before 9 usually, depending on where you live, or it needs to be in the afternoon. Here I normally water after 5 p.m. just because of the heat. No matter what time of the year it is, I usually do it after 5 p.m. So I think that's been a really beneficial thing for my plants, is figuring that out. Obviously you have to figure that out for your own time zone and where you live and your sun conditions. But that's how I water. Now, what I want to do now is get up and I'll actually start watering these plants and show you it's super easy. It's not very tough. And all of these are going to be bottom watered today.
So I know these hold a little bit over a gallon of water, so all I'm going to do is take 1 capful per. Let's find a spot where I can pour it in. Stuff smells so bad. Oh, now I got it on my hand. I gotta go wash my eyes. It's so gross. It smells like dead fish. This is exactly what it is. Dead, fermented, decaying fish. Alright, last one. Oh, I got some on my table. I gotta wash the table off too. Ooh. Stinks so bad. Alright. See, I know once I put some of these plants in water in here, some of these plants are going to start floating. So I have to watch out what I'm doing. Go away. Obviously, it doesn't really matter how quickly you fill this right now because you're not watering the plant. So you don't have to worry about flow rate. You just don't want to overfill the container. And I have to do this one at a time because sometimes some of these smaller, lighter plants tend to float around and I have to make sure that they get stabilized before I stop watering. Alright, that one's almost full. And what I'm doing is every place in here where I put the fertilizer, that's where I'm putting the head of the watering wand to actually put the water in here. So that way I don't have to mix it, it's mixing itself. Alright. These are almost done, and once I get done with this, I'll show you how much I'm filling with. I know it's hard to see from 5 feet away. So I can't exactly do both at the same time. Now, I really like bottom watering my succulents because, like I said, I have to water them less, but in doing so, I induce a lot of growth out of these things. Oh, it's right here. Because a number of these plants have been growing for about 2 years, and I've found that even with bottom watering, sometimes it gets real finicky. You have to be very, very careful. Alright, that's smelling better when it's mixed up. So let's take a look and see exactly what we're doing. So as you can see, this is the lip of this, and there's the water. So I've only got about 1/4 of an inch there. I'm not really sure what that is in millimeters, but that's about, what, 8 millimeters? And I know it's hard to see right now, but since this is a fabric pot, you will, if I left this on here all day, you would see the water travel literally all the way up here. Because you can see where the water line stops, because that's where the soil stops. So what I'll do is we'll come back later and we'll check out a bunch of these, and you'll see that this soil will be dark, it'll be wet. Especially for this plant, because it has very compacted soil. We'll come back later today in 3 or 4 hours, and we'll see that all of this will be dense, dark, and wet. And that's another thing about bottom watering that I like. Set it and forget it type thing for a few hours. I don't have to worry about anything. Just come back, all the plants have absorbed all the water they need, and I can throw everything into the garden that I need to recycle the water with. So I'll usually take all of these, and I'll probably water these snake plants, this Mexican sage, and this hibiscus plant right here. I'll probably take all of this fertilized water and water all of this stuff with it, because this is water. It's still useful, still got fertilizer in it, so there's no reason for me to just throw it away anywhere in my yard. It makes no sense. So that's it for now. We're going to come back in a few hours and see how everything's doing. Alright, here we are about 4 or 5 hours after I made the first part of this video, and all these plants have now been watered. And as we can see, how much of that water has actually been soaked up with this plant specifically. As we can see, it's been about 1 inch, because it was about up to here when we filled it, and now it's way down here, and this whole fiber pot is soaking wet.
we look inside, we can see the wet soil, which is right here on the edges, and this drier soil. It still needs to soak. Some of these plants still need more time, some do not. I actually need to put more water in this specific one because as we can see how much came down, and I can still see that there's dry soil up here. That means more water needs to be added because all of the plants right here are still dry, which means they need more water. Let's check this one. All of these look pretty good. That's wet. That's definitely wet. Those are all wet, and we can see that they used about the same amount of water as this tray. So these two trays used almost the same amount of water. But these plants aren't fully watered, as we see. Now earlier, I talked about this plant specifically because it would be easiest for us to tell how well this works with this specific plant. Earlier, this soil was very dry and very brown. We can see it's still very, very spongy, but it's dark. It's moist. It's sticking to me now, see? And that's all because of the capillary action of the roots and the soil spraying all that straight up from there. All of these actually used about the same amount of water, except for this one. These plants are either adequately watered already, or they just didn't need any, which I guess is the same thing. But they apparently don't need as much. These are all wet already. So what I'll do is I'll take some of these out and put others in. And for this one specifically, I'm gonna add some more water. I'm gonna take most of these out and put others in because, again, there's no need to throw out the water. It's still usable. So let's get that going. Well, as we can, hey Clive, he decided to join for the last part of the video today. As we can see, those are all the real techniques that you need to know about watering. There's not a lot of in-depth science to it unless you're doing something super specific like hydroponics or aquaponics or something like that. What I have to do for a general garden, or what most people have to do for a general garden, isn't very difficult as far as watering goes. The only thing you have to figure out is the schedule that you need to go on. My plants have taken a couple years to get to know. You're gonna get to need to know your plants as well. Like I have some of these plants out here in the garden. They gotta be watered every day because they're blooming. They just need a lot of water because they're blooming. That takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of nutrients. So that's really it. There's no secret sauce to it. There's no secret science. There's nothing special. It just takes determination and takes a schedule on your own time, and it takes figuring out your plants, what works best for them and what doesn't, and what works best for you and what doesn't, and your time. So that's gonna be it from now. Again, my name's Busy. Take it easy.